Think of a moment that still irritates you. You're in a conversation, not heated yet, just tense. The other person is wrong, not subtly wrong, clearly wrong. No background, no evidence, no effort to check themselves, and yet they speak without hesitation, full certainty, clean confidence. You hesitate instead. You replay facts in your head. You second-guess your phrasing. You wonder if you're missing something. That imbalance is the first signal. People often give this pattern a neat label, as if naming it makes it harmless. But long before it had a label, some observers noticed how often it appeared. Not in extremes, in normal settings, lecture halls, meetings, small social circles, spaces where loud certainty travels faster than quiet accuracy. Mediocre thinking delivered with total conviction. Better thinking wrapped in caution. What stood out wasn't that errors happened. It was who felt doubt and who didn't. Those with less grasp spoke faster. Those with more awareness slowed down, not because they were weaker, because they could see the edges of what they didn't know. Here's the uncomfortable part. Confidence doesn't scale with accuracy. It often moves in the opposite direction, not randomly, systematically. The mind protects itself from seeing its own limits. When there's little depth, there's little friction. Nothing pushes back internally. So certainty feels natural, smooth, effortless. When understanding deepens, resistance appears. Contradictions, exceptions, unclear boundaries, and confidence starts to wobble. This creates a quiet inversion. Ignorance feels solid, awareness feels unstable. Most people notice this pattern only in others, in arguments, on screens, in public figures, almost never in themselves. Because from the inside, being confidently wrong doesn't feel reckless. It feels correct. It feels obvious. Every person who has ever held a wrong belief with certainty felt exactly that way at the time. No warning signs, no internal alarm, which raises a problem most people avoid. If certainty can come from not seeing enough, how do you know when your own confidence is earned and when it's just unchallenged? And more importantly, what does the mind do to keep you from noticing the difference? Notice what happens when certainty enters the room. Someone speaks as if the matter is settled. No pauses, no qualifiers. The tone alone suggests closure. That confidence usually comes with a specific blindness, not arrogance, not intent, a missing perception. Some observers noticed this pattern long before it had modern names. They watched how doubt behaved, where it appeared, and where it never showed up. The pattern was consistent. The more a person could register complexity, the less rigid their certainty became, not because they were unsure, because they could see more moving parts. When complexity isn't visible, everything feels straightforward, clean, manageable, finished. That simplicity is comfortable. It feels like control. You can see it in everyday moments. A beginner watches someone skilled and thinks, that's not that complicated. They try it once, it falls apart immediately. Suddenly there are details they didn't notice before. Timing, structure, constraints. The task expands. That expansion is unsettling. It replaces ease with friction. But it also introduces something new. Awareness of distance. Some people never reach that point. Not because they refuse to learn, but because they never go far enough to see what's missing. So the task stays small in their mind. Uncertainty stays intact. This isn't rare. It shows up in discussions about systems, people, history, behavior. A little exposure creates strong opinions. Not depth, just confidence. Headlines feel like understanding. Summaries feel like mastery. The noise is loud. The signal is invisible. From the outside, this looks like ignorance. From the inside, it feels like clarity. That's what makes it difficult to interrupt. and harder to detect in yourself? Because the absence of doubt doesn't register as a problem. It registers as relief, which raises a quieter tension. If doubt grows with contact and certainty grows with distance, what does that say about the moments when you feel most sure? And what happens when that certainty is never challenged at all? Surface level often feels complete. You see it in what gets attention. Short statements, clean certainty. Nothing to slow the listener down. Some observers noticed long ago that simple claims always find a crowd. Not because they're stronger, but because they don't ask much from the audience when depth isn't visible. Everything sounds equal. A layered argument and a blunt claim land the same. So comfort wins. Ease becomes the signal. And ease gets mistaken for truth. There's a quiet reversal here. The more ground someone actually covers, the more edges they see. Conditions, limits, conflicts. But when those edges aren't visible, the picture feels finished, closed, settled. That feeling is seductive. It feels like coherence. Watch how people talk about complex things in casual settings. Politics at a dinner table, economics in a comment thread, psychology after a podcast episode. The answer arrives fast, smooth, unqualified, no pauses, no maybe, no war, no tension. From the outside, it sounds confident. From the inside, it feels complete. But completeness can come from absence, not mastery, from not seeing what pushes back. You've probably felt this yourself. Recognizing terms, following the conversation, feeling oriented enough to agree or disagree. Recognition creates comfort. Comfort creates confidence. And confidence shuts the door. There's a difference most people never examine. Being exposed versus being in contact. Knowing the language versus working inside the structure. One feels active, the other only feels familiar. Familiarity is quiet. It doesn't resist. So it's easy to mistake it for understanding. This is why surface exposure scales so quickly into authority. A few articles, a handful of clips. Now advice flows freely. The speaker doesn't feel reckless, they feel aligned. And that's the problem. Ignorance doesn't announce itself as ignorance. It announces itself as clarity, which creates a sharper question than before. If certainty can come from not seeing enough, how do you tell the difference between real coherence and the comfort of never being challenged at all? And what happens next when that comfort is protected instead of tested? Ask a follow-up and watch what happens. Not a hostile one, just a specific one. The confidence stalls. The eyes drift. The answer dissolves into silence or repetition. They recognize the language. They don't hold the structure. This gap shows up everywhere. In conversations that sound informed until one detail is pressed. In discussions that collapse the moment precision is required. Some observers noticed this pattern early in academic spaces. Colleagues referenced ideas fluently, used the right terms, spoke as if they were inside the work. Then one sentence revealed it. The core had been missed, not ignored. Never reached, they weren't lying, they were familiar, and familiarity felt sufficient. That's the contradiction. Recognition creates confidence without contact. Surface access produces the feeling of depth. Today, that condition is amplified. You scroll for minutes and absorb years of vocabulary, neuroscience, psychology, ethics, systems, markets. Everything looks approachable. Everything sounds manageable. The feed creates coherence without resistance. Noise passes as signal. From inside the experience, it doesn't feel shallow. It feels informed, connected, updated. You've likely felt this yourself. Knowing the terms, following the debate, feeling aligned enough to judge. No friction appears, so nothing slows you down. But knowing about something is not being inside it. Hearing perspectives is not holding constraints. Exposure does not test understanding. Some thinkers warned about this quietly. That most of what reaches you arrives as opinion, as angle, as partial view. When those fragments are mistaken for substance, learning stops without announcing itself. There's no resistance left to push against, no reason to dig. Confidence remains. Depth does not arrive. And that's where the danger sharpens. Not ignorance alone, but ignorance that feels complete. If familiarity can freeze curiosity and certainty can grow without understanding, then what determines whether your confidence is earned or simply unchallenged? And what happens when that distinction disappears entirely? There's a quieter divide underneath all of this. Some people can tell when something is better than what they can do. Others can't. Not because they refuse to admit it, because they don't have the internal reference. One observer pointed out something uncomfortable. To recognize excellence, you need a minimum level of ability yourself. Without that, distinction disappears. Watch how this shows up in ordinary situations. A child watching a high-level chess game sees movement, not strategy. A person with no musical training hears good and stops there. Nothing stands out. Nothing separates. From their position, everything looks similar. Competent and exceptional blur together. That blindness isn't loud. It's calm. It feels neutral. If you can't perceive difference, you can't aim upward. Not because you lack ambition, but because there's no visible target. So effort stalls without resistance. Growth doesn't feel necessary. This pattern was noticed in academic spaces long ago. Students comparing discipline systems to casual opinions, treating both as interchangeable, not out of disrespect, out of inability to see structure. Without the tools to detect rigor, everything reads as preference. One view, another view, all equal. The same thing happens now at scale. Research beside commentary, analysis beside performance. Both delivered with confidence, both received the same way. If you don't have contact with the underlying work, signal and noise merge. That's where the cycle tightens. Low-quality output doesn't register as low quality. It registers as normal. From the inside, it feels complete, finished, adequate. No arrogance is required, only absence. The gap isn't denied, it's invisible, which is why confidence can survive untouched, why comparison never corrects it, why improvement never begins. Some insights hint at this indirectly, that certain kinds of understanding can't be transferred cleanly. They have to be built internally. Until then, perception stays flat. So here's the pressure point. If recognition itself requires competence, and incompetence hides the gap, what happens to someone who never encounters a signal strong enough to break through? And how would they even know it happened when it does? There's another layer to this that tightens the pressure. Skills that can be taught can also be replicated. What's transferable is visible. What's not is harder to spot. Some people never notice what isn't obvious. They register patterns anyone can see. They miss structure. To them, the invisible might as well not exist. You see it in small, ordinary moments. Someone submits a piece of work and feels satisfied, confident even. On the page, the sentences flow. The tone sounds professional. It resembles things they've read before. What they don't see are the breaks, the unsupported jumps, the arguments that never land. An experienced reader sees it instantly. The gaps stand out. The weaknesses announce themselves, but from the inside, none of that is felt, because noticing it requires the very skill that's missing. So the self-assessment stays high. Not out of arrogance, out of absence. That distance between perception and reality can be enormous and completely undetectable to the person inside it. This isn't delusion, it's blindness. Some observers described it sharply, that real ability reaches places others don't even register, and those without the baseline don't see a target at all. Showing up feels like success. Presence feels like performance. But the pattern doesn't stop at simplicity. There's a more deceptive version. Some people mistake complexity for depth. Long words, dense language, elaborate frameworks. The surface feels sophisticated, so it must be intelligent. In those moments, complexity becomes cover, noise replaces signal, confusion passes as rigor. You've heard it before. Meetings filled with abstract phrasing. Writing that sounds impressive but resists examination. The language creates distance, and that distance feels like authority. Simple errors are easy to catch. Complicated ones hide longer. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If both simplicity and complexity can conceal absence, how do you tell when something is genuinely structured and when it's just untouchable? And what happens when the ability to tell never develops at all? It sounds impressive at first. Dense language, layered references, sentences that stretch longer than they need to. You listen and feel slightly behind. That delay registers as sophistication. But if you pause and strip away the surface, something odd appears. The meaning doesn't deepen, it thins. Observers noticed this pattern repeatedly. Papers filled with technical phrasing, careful citations, complex constructions, and underneath, very little movement. The ideas weren't new, they weren't tested, they weren't worked through. They were familiar thoughts wearing heavy clothing. That kind of complexity creates comfort for the speaker. It protects them from being examined. If no one can touch it, no one can challenge it. You've seen the modern version, a stage, a confident voice, slides packed with terminology, neuroscience terms drift by, frameworks are named, studies are referenced in passing. It feels authoritative, it feels current, until you imagine pressing on one point, asking how it actually works, or what happens when conditions change. The surface holds, the structure doesn't. From the outside, this looks like intelligence. From the inside, it feels like control. That's the contradiction. Clarity would invite contact. Complexity keeps distance. Some observers cut through this sharply. They noticed that undigested knowledge tends to circulate unchanged. Ideas are consumed, not transformed, so they come back out intact, polished, unexamined. In those moments, complexity isn't a sign of depth, it's a shelter. You may recognize the feeling, using language you've absorbed, repeating ideas that sound right, feeling aligned enough to speak, no accusation there. Just a familiar state. There's a quiet inversion that happens here. Understanding can move between simple and complex without strain. Performance can't. Performance stays dense. That's where it survives. And when complexity becomes the signal of intelligence, simplicity starts to look suspicious, which leads to an uneasy pressure point. If obscurity can pass as depth and confidence can mask absence, what happens to real understanding in environments that reward being untouchable? And how long can something stay unexamined before it hardens into authority? Difficulty and depth often get confused. Some things are hard to understand because they are dense. Others become simple only after real contact. Observers noticed the difference early. They watched arguments where complexity increased but understanding didn't move. What caused the breakdown wasn't stubbornness. It was something quieter. Correction requires a specific ability. You have to sense a gap between what you believe and what's happening. Without that perception, nothing registers as correction. It just feels like disagreement. That creates a sealed system. Evidence arrives and bounces off. Logic is heard as opinion. Clarification sounds like hostility. You've seen this play out. A conversation that starts calmly. Someone makes a claim with confidence. You respond carefully. Data is dismissed. Sources are questioned without being read. Reasoning is labeled unnecessary, not argued against, ignored. Each attempt to engage tightens the loop. The tools don't fail, they never land. Some observers describe this as a closed circuit. Ignorance blocks perception. Blocked perception protects ignorance. From inside the loop, everything feels consistent, stable, self-contained. There's a subtle discomfort here. The more clearly you explain, the less it seems to matter. Precision doesn't help. It irritates. That's because recognition is missing. To register a correction, you have to notice misalignment. Without that, nothing changes. This was seen repeatedly in intellectual disputes. Arguments answered with misreadings. Objections aimed at positions never taken. When those errors were pointed out, the response wasn't adjustment. It was repetition. Not malicious, automatic. The modern version happens constantly. A claim appears online. Counterpoints follow. No engagement, just restatement. The loop holds. From the outside, this looks irrational. From the inside, it feels coherent, which sharpens the pressure. If correction depends on perception and perception depends on competence, what happens in environments where confidence is rewarded but perception never develops? And if the loop can't be broken from the inside, where does that leave everyone else trying to speak into it? You point out a flaw in their reasoning, not aggressively, just precisely. They don't respond to the flaw, they react to the tone. The moment passes. Defensiveness replaces attention. You realize something uncomfortable. You're not disagreeing. You're not even being heard. You're operating with different tools. And one side doesn't know the other set exists. Some observers noticed a pattern here. The desire to be right creates a strange contract. It locks attention forward, not inward. Learning requires reversal, a pause, a willingness to see misalignment. But reversal only happens if the gap is visible. When the gap can't be perceived, wrongness never registers, so nothing changes. Confidence stays intact. Watch how this plays out in extreme cases. Someone holds a belief tightly, evidence appears. It's dismissed, reframed, reinterpreted. Images are fake, explanations are theory, contradictions become exceptions. Each response preserves the structure, not the truth. Accepting the evidence would require abandoning the framework. But the framework is all they have. So the system defends itself. From the inside, this doesn't feel dishonest. It feels consistent, protected. That's the micro discomfort. The stronger the belief, the less contact it allows. Some thinkers describe this as a kind of forfeiture, not of opinion, but of flexibility. Once that flexibility is gone, a change becomes impossible from within. At that point, argument stops being exchange. It becomes friction. No amount of clarity penetrates a closed structure. Not because the message fails, but because there's no receiver. This is why certain conversations exhaust you. You bring signal, they generate noise. You leave feeling drained, not because you lost, but because nothing moved. There's a quiet escalation here. It's not just that some people are wrong, it's that some positions are unreachable, not emotionally, structurally. And that reframes the entire problem. If confidence can be built on absence and protected by closure, what does engagement actually cost you? And when does trying to correct become participation in the loop itself? All of these forces lock together. Each one supports the next. Certainty feeds blindness. Blindness protects certainty. From inside that structure, everything feels stable, even intelligent, There's no deception happening, no performance. They believe it because from where they stand, that's EO. There is no outside to compare against, no reference point, no contrast. Some observers describe this bluntly. That real ability reaches places others can't detect, and without the ability to detect, nothing appears missing. No target, no direction, just movement that feels correct. Here's the pressure point. Every person trapped in that state feels justified, including you, including me. That's what makes it dangerous. The moment you assume immunity, you're already inside it. So the question shifts, not who is blind, but how blindness loosens its grip. Some patterns suggest an answer, not certainty, its opposite. Not collapse or hesitation, but controlled doubt. The kind that interrupts comfort. That pauses confidence long enough to look for resistance. Questions begin to appear. What would contradict this? Who understands this better than I do? What evidence would actually force revision? Those questions don't weaken understanding, they strain it. People who never ask them feel calm, protected, finished. People who do live with friction, not confusion, contact. There's another layer here that's easy to miss. Modern environments reward stimulation over examination, agreement over friction. It's easier to feel informed than to be challenged, easier to consume than to test. That ease feels like wisdom, but it doesn't behave like it, which leads to a quiet experiment you may already feel forming. Think of something you're certain about, not casually, deeply. Notice what happens when you imagine pressing against it, not to defend it, to stress it. Does curiosity rise or does resistance? That reaction matters more than the position itself. Because discomfort isn't always a threat. Sometimes it's the only signal left. If certainty feels safe and doubt feels destabilizing, which one is actually keeping you from seeing? And how would you know the difference before it's too late?